evening, everyone. I hope the conference has been enjoyable thus far, and I hope to kind of continue momentum with regards to that. Excuse me. Okay. It is important for me to start by saying that this paper bears little resemblance to the proposal I submitted for this conference, in part because of the scarcity of literature about the Black queer experience in British secondary schools, but more to the point, because my readings and ruminations of past events would not allow for me to honour and expand on my initial ideas. As a result, I have journeyed along a different path. To say that writing this paper has been a strenuous task would be a gross understatement. I have battled, groaned with frustration, and lay awake in silence, unable, and at times unwilling, to confront that which I had fooled myself into thinking I had forgotten. However, with Audre Lorde's incessant reminder that my silence will not protect me, I have decided to follow my heart and speak my truth. In a bid to transgress the rigid constraints of Western academia, I will employ a queer, wayward modality that will enable me to dance between letter writing and theory as a means to narrate and excavate deeper truths about the Black queer experience within British secondary schools. Whilst this paper possesses the didactic intention and scope to offer wisdom and insight to all who choose to engage, this is very much a medicinal and cathartic practice that has enabled me to bear witness to a painful period I sought to live over. Before proceeding, I will provide some necessary context. The school I will be referring to is a Catholic boys' school based in London, in which I taught several years ago. 80% of students were Black, namely African and Afro-Caribbean, and over 40% of students were Muslim. In addition, over 90% of staff were white British, and the majority of the senior leadership team, SLT, consisted of white middle-class, cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied men. This paper will be formatted as a letter addressed to a student who in many ways reminded me that hope is a verb that must be embodied. For the sake of anonymity, I have changed his name. Thus, this paper is entitled Black Queer Subjectivity and the Performative Function of the Closet, a letter to Emmanuel. Dear Emmanuel, how are you? How is life treating you, and what adventures has it taken you on since we last spoke? With all the changes and uncertainty regarding student assessments for their GCSE and A-level grades, and the impact it inevitably caused, you have undoubtedly been on my mind. I pray that COVID has had a minimal impact on both you and your loved ones. And despite this being a time of great uncertainty and turbulence, I hope that you have been able to make of it something healthy. COVID has ironically taught us and robbed us of many things. One of the things it took from me was the opportunity to say goodbye to you. Perhaps some solace can be found in knowing that this letter will allow me to say that which words could not. I still remember the first time we met. You arrived at my classroom a few minutes before the lesson started. Up until that moment, I knew nothing of your existence. You gently knocked on my door, too timid to enter, in case some of your peers had reached before you. Your tall, slim body, big eyes, waves for a haircut, rich mahogany complexion, glossy lips, soft voice, and gentle demeanor was most unexpected. I was shocked to see you. I was shocked that such a soul could exist in a concrete jungle that prided itself on toxic masculinity and a monolithic understanding of Blackness. You smiled, introduced yourself, and although this was our first encounter, you confided in me. Perhaps you saw in me someone you could trust. Perhaps you saw in me a reflection of yourself. Perhaps you sensed in me a kindred spirit, and thus someone who had the capacity to cradle that which you held dear. It was in that moment that God reminded me why he wanted me to stay in this school. Despite enjoying our brief interlude, it quickly dawned upon me who your classmates were. I remember asking why the school had not placed you in another set. You informed me that because you were returning to the school following your leaving because of the extent to which the homophobia had reached, you had missed far too much education, and as such, the powers that be felt that you would not cope in a more challenging environment. I provided you with a book and gave you an activity to do whilst I went outside, anxiously waiting for the rest of the class to arrive. At the best of times, I found your class unbearable to teach, and this was only intensified upon your arrival. I remember feeling as though I could not afford for you to be out of sight. Whilst your peers did not even wish to acknowledge your existence, the unsaid tension and hostility in the room made it abundantly clear that you were not safe here. I remember having to dismiss you before the end of lessons so that you would not have any unsupervised interactions with not only your classmates, but also the wider school. I remember at times when this was not possible, I would offer to escort you to your next lesson and destination. I remember being so taken aback and dismayed by the lack of support and structure that the school had put in place, and horrified at the extent to which your difference and the school's inability to facilitate your difference impacted your life. Still, you came to school knowing how your day would start, continue, and end. I do not know how you did it. Your resilience till this day both humbles and weighs heavy on me. Although at the time it would have been unwise for me to say this to you, I felt proud when you told me that you had had enough of being quiet. I felt proud when you, in more colourful terms, told me that a tooth for a tooth and an eye for an eye was now your mantra. I felt proud when I saw that you were doing for yourself that which the school and I were unable to do: protect you. Often, I would sit in silence as you recounted times when you had been ambushed in the boys' toilets and along the corridors. I felt proud that your immortality during combat made these attacks less frequent. The school in a multitude of ways was a prison for both the victim and the victimizer. I often wonder if contentment could ever be found there. This was not a school where one could come in to develop their pedagogy, flourish, and call a home until retirement. On the contrary, the high staff turnover and sick days was evidence that this school was not fertile soil for such seeds. It remains a mystery as to why the school has not been shut down. I have always maintained that as I have been fortunate enough to receive a good level of education, I have a duty to give back to my community. If my privileged background could not help my own, then whom? But sadly, the people who I came to serve, the people who I had and continue to fight for so ferociously in a multitude of arenas, were the same people bludgeoning me to my death. They did not know who I was, but I knew who they were. I am haunted by recollections of a fellow teacher suggesting that had your sexuality not been so obvious, and had you not been so effeminate, your experience and time there would have been easier. He openly and freely expressed this to me, knowing my own identity and how dearly I cared for you. In typical fashion, the blame was laid at the door of the victim and survivor, as opposed to the perpetrator and the systems that normalised this violence. Even queer members of staff took a similar stance. During these reoccurring onslaughts, I typically sat in silence, emotionally and physically recoiling from both them and myself. In such instances, I do now, as I did then, render myself complicit. Emmanuel, please know, it is not my intention to hurt you with these revelations, but rather to inform you that, You are not in community with all queer people. And those who share a similar identity to you can often act as your enemy. It is easy, Emmanuel, for lines to become blurred. Life for students in such an environment was synonymous with that of a prisoner ruled by racist guards whose actions were normalized through racist policies, practices, and the abuse of power. Even though it was their difference that saw them being treated in such a way, it was your difference that allowed them to refashion their identity and in their mind lay claim to moral superiority. They instinctively knew that they were undeserving of such inhumane treatment, but for reasons shrouded in mob mentality, parodies of Adam and Eve, and an obsessive disdain with homosexual intercourse, they could not engulf you within the same humanity they so desperately sought for themselves. On countless occasions, I saw how your queerness ejected you from the rhetoric of blackness and left you desolate in the zone of non-being. For all the times that your mom had to collect you early from school because your safety could not be guaranteed. When you and your friends sprinted to the science block because the teachers had to lock you in and wait for SLT to come because of the lynch mob awaiting you. The times when you were reminded that the hostility of the classroom and your inevitable truanting was impacting your grades. The fact that the newly formed LGBTQ club was brought to an abrupt halt because it was not the right time for the rest of the boys in the school. For all the times that your dignity was compromised. For all those nights that you screamed in silence. For all the times that your mere existence equated to an anguish that words could never attest to. You, Emmanuel, are a beautiful, wonderful, and magical piece of your Creator's divine and complex design. God sees you, God created you, and in every sense of the word, God affirms you. May this be the pillow you rest your head on. You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens. Rumi. Over the course of my life, I have experienced multiple heartbreaks. Love lost, unrequited love, rejection, and the pain that occurs from not having learned from past experiences. All these heartbreaks have indeed softened, shaped, sanctified, and helped cultivate the person I am today. I do, however, believe that there is such a thing as too much heartbreak. I so desperately wish to ask Rumi, what is one to do when the gentlest and timid of souls experiences a heartbreak so great that they, in all their entirety, become numb? For much of my life, I have lived in multiple closets. These closets have simultaneously provided a haven and a prison cell. My survival required me to constantly negotiate the power dynamics. Whilst the closet that housed me during my time at the school in a multitude of ways kept me alive, its sharp splinters, low ceiling, and flooring that was in fact quicksand has left permanent scars. The closet dictated the terms of my existence through the following ways. Whilst ostracizing me, it allowed me to develop relationships with those in my community. Whilst imprisoning me, it granted me minimal movement. It made excuses for my deviances on the condition that I denounce my queerness and remain long-suffering in the face of homophobic attacks. It allowed for me to imagine acts of resistance, but with its minimal oxygen levels, voicing such thoughts would have suffocated me. Secrecy and calculated amounts of disclosure always acted as fertile ground for students to inquire about my private life. And when they were dissatisfied with my answer, this would act as a means to test my authority. It was not always possible to tackle homophobia head on. In plain sight, their bullets would penetrate my flesh, causing indescribable pain. The rate at which the blood would hemorrhage from my body would make it impossible at times to turn these fatalities into teachable moments. I had to perform physical, emotional, and psychological CPR on myself. Within the closet, staying alive was in itself an act of labor. Excuse me. We endured a school that possessed an anti-discrimination policy that was never executed or reinforced with any real conviction. As a Black masculine presenting woman who demonstrated eloquence, a gentle temperament, ambiguous mannerisms, and a strong subject knowledge about the world of religion and beyond, I was an anomaly in many ways. My textual body possessed an intersectionality that meant I was under constant surveillance. The closet, yet again, placed me in another untenable position, and as a result, I prioritized my Blackness over my queerness. During lessons where homosexuality would arise, the ever-present gaze always saw me place the comfort of my audience above my own humanity. Thus, all of my attempts to defend both you and I manifested in diluted mantras that pervade our community. Love the sinner, hate the sin, let God judge, and the LGBTQ issue is not my fight. We as racialized minorities have greater concerns. Even as I write these rehearsed rebuttals, I am filled with an overwhelming sense of shame. With my minimal efforts perpetuating more violence, I sought refuge within my faith, and it was there that I was reminded of a truth I had long forgotten. We must allow the flesh to speak. During our next lesson, instead of doing what I was so ill-equipped to do, I simply asked if you wished to speak, and you did. For 15 minutes, you shared how your heartbreak and experiences, and you so beautifully articulated that you neither chose to be gay, and because of the behavior of your peers, you had little choice in how you lived your life. Thank you, Emmanuel, for voicing that which I could not. I am fast approaching that most conversations about queerness in education are dominated by white people. They sit at the table, speaking for us, making decisions on our behalf, all whilst never truly seeing us. At best, we are limited to horrific anecdotes to further support their views, and at worst, they perpetuate the white savior complex. Within such circles, there is a gay liberationist narrative that acknowledges that whilst there is no compulsion, queer teachers should seek to serve as role models for their queer students. Some go as far as to denounce the closet with little consideration about the plethora of complex ways that intersections of the queer community are able to utilize it. At times, the pressure of such a confined space weighed heavy upon me, and after much persuasion, I opened up to a colleague. Whilst initially he was very supportive, my gender, racialized queer identity, and fascination about my sexual appetite transformed my body into a site of erased boundaries, impositions of patriarchal and heteronormativity, and a theatre where constant ridicule of my deepest insecurities and fears pervaded, often cloaked as banter. In an environment where your flesh and sexuality are regarded as inherently sinful, one must fragment themselves in order to belong. My desire for the betterment of my people superseded my queerness, but ironically, it was my unique racialized identity that allowed for this violence to become more palpable. My white colleagues also placed their racial solidarity above their queerness, and this inevitably allowed for supposed allies to benefit from this violent, dualistic approach. The queer liberative narrative fails to truly appreciate how the interplays of power within intra-communal intersections of gender, race, class, religion, and culture plays out within public and private spaces. It is easy, Emmanuel, for lines to remain blurred. If I may, I wish to leave you with some words of wisdom. Your time at the school in many ways altered your humanity. Consciously and subconsciously, rage and despair became your mother tongue. You must endeavour to tend to your pain and heal your wounds. Whilst I myself am on this lifelong journey, I know all too well that trauma not transformed becomes trauma transferred. Seek help and support, and create and cultivate a community that remedies the ache for a home that you have so long desired. You will know when you have found it, because you can be as you are, unquestioned. Explore the subjectivity of your own humanity. Sometimes it is easy for us to forget that the colonized can also be a colonizer. Be mindful that your politics does not mirror that of your oppressors. Educate yourself on the ways in which people who identify as you identify relate to other marginalized groups. Misogyny, transphobia, and ableism are incredibly pervasive in our communities. Our liberation is bound in their liberation because our oppression is interconnected. And lastly, Emmanuel, give people their flowers. Take the time to thank and show gratitude to those who have shown kindness to you. Whilst they may not have always acted as their best selves, your flowers will honour the fact that they did what they could with the limited resources they had. There is a price to pay for being Black and queer. You pay whether you fight or walk away. Money, opportunities, dreams. And to say it is not fair would be infantile. Decisions are not grounded in what we win, but rather what we are willing to lose. The only thing that is worth this grief is the truth. As the sun sets on each day, and it is just you and the silence of the world, you must always seek to honestly answer the question, who am I when there is nowhere to hide? The answer to this question, Emmanuel, must be something that you can enjoy and seek to delight in. Sending you peace and blessings, your teacher, student, and admirer, Ms. Brown. Thank you.